This is one of those cases where once you hear it, you will never forget it. Deceit, betrayal, and murder, with gutting twists I certainly would have never predicted. I'm Olivia LaVoice, crime reporter and creator of the Casefile Presents podcast, The Bakersfield Three. I've teamed up with Casefile to bring you some of their most memorable cases in a visual format. Today's case is based on Casefile episode number 267, Brian Barrett. In 2005, there was a popular gaming site called Pogo.com that was a platform for strangers and friends to play a variety of online games together. And there was a chat option so players could interact and whatnot. One day, a user named MarineSniper was playing blackjack when they got a message from another player named TalHotBlond. TalHotBlond introduced herself as 18-year-old Jessi. She messaged MarineSniper and told him that he was in the wrong place. The poker room they were in was for teens, and TalHotBlond pointed out that MarineSniper's profile listed him as 46 years old. MarineSniper responded that he wasn't in the wrong room. He said he was 18 and was using his dad's account to play. And so the two continued to chat. MarineSniper revealed his name was Tommy. He lived in upstate New York and had dreams of joining the Marines like his father had. But Tommy soon explained he didn't always want to be like his dad. He told Jessi his mom died when he was 12, and after that, he never felt loved. He told her that eventually he became closed off from the world and was a loner. He also told Jessi he was occasionally suicidal and struggled with self-hatred. When he was 17, keep in mind he said he was 18 now, he told Jessi he raped a cheerleader from his high school. He said he felt he had hit rock bottom. It's one way to put it. Anyways, we can assume there was no criminal case, unfortunately for the victim, because Tommy said his way of dealing with it was to enlist in the Marines. He told Jessi in 2 months he would be heading to boot camp in South Carolina. Despite this horrifying confession of being a rapist, Jessi apparently felt compassion towards Tommy and was proud of him for working to find himself. She knew that terrible feeling of lacking direction and the stress it can cause. Jessi lived in West Virginia in a small town called Oak Hill. She had a fairly typical life. She lived with her parents and her younger brother. She told Tommy her family drama consisted of her often fighting with her mother. Jessi said she loved sports and was excellent at both basketball and softball. She worked part-time as a lifeguard and was a senior in high school preparing to graduate soon, and then was heading off to college. But she was struggling to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. But the idea of Tommy being in the picture suddenly made her future seem brighter. During their very first conversation, Jessi sent Tommy some photos of her in a bikini. Just as her username suggested, she was tall and athletic with long blonde hair and tan skin. Jessi continued to send more photos, varying from glamour shots taken at the mall by a professional to candid photos of her playing sports. Jessi even began making photo slideshows for Tommy, one of them to the Aerosmith song, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing. When Tommy described his physical appearance to Jessi, he told her he was 6 feet tall with a muscular build. Eventually, he sent Jessi a photo of himself in his uniform, and Jessi liked what she saw. The two began to talk more and eventually started having lengthy phone calls. When Tommy was headed to boot camp in South Carolina, his schedule got tight, but he still always managed to find time to speak with Jessi. And it wasn't long before the two declared their love for each other. Their conversations became racier and more intense. Tommy even told Jessi he got a tattoo on his arm of a heart with her name in it, and the words always and forever. The two longed for a future together, but then Tommy got word that after boot camp, he'd be shipped out to the Middle East to fight in the Iraqi war. He told Jessi that internet access would be fairly restricted during this time, and so if she wanted to send him a care package or get an urgent message to him, she could do so through his father, Tom Sr. Tommy explained that Tom Sr.'s Marine contacts could get the package to Tommy faster than the U.S. Postal Service. Jessi sent Tom Sr. letters and photos, which he then forwarded to Tommy. But being far away from Jessi ignited Tommy's jealous streak. He accused her of flirting with other men from their gaming community, which led to the couple's first argument. Eager to make up, Jessi sent Tommy a care package that included a pair of her underwear and a necklace in the shape of half a heart. Jessi had the other half, of course. So all seemed to be well between them, but Tom Sr., Tommy's dad, did not agree with the relationship. He tried to discourage Jessi from continuing to pursue Tommy and eventually told her he would no longer help her send messages to his son. He told Jessi, quote, "You will hurt him and he's an idiot and will believe your lying ass." But Jessi didn't care. She continued contacting Tommy, talking about their future, and telling him she was worried about his safety while he was fighting in Iraq. In one message she wrote, "I know you're being careful, honey, and you have the best with you, but I also know anything can happen." Tommy kept replying to Jessi, reassuring her and saying she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. As December rolled around, the couple had been in contact for roughly 8 months. At Christmas, Tommy surprised Jessi by proposing to her. She accepted and then sent Tommy another pair of her panties, as well as dog tags engraved with the words, "Tom and Jessi, always and forever." The couple planned to get married when Tommy returned home from Iraq. The two talked about their wedding and how bright their future was. And then 2 months later, Jessi received a letter in the mail. Inside the envelope was a family photo. Pictured was a middle-aged woman with shoulder-length dirty blonde hair sitting in the center. Beside her was a middle-aged man who was balding and wearing glasses. On either side of the couple were 2 teenage girls. With the photo was a handwritten note that read, quote, "Jessi, enclosed you will find a picture of my family. Let me introduce you to these people. The man in the center is Tom, my husband." And there it was, a bombshell. There was no Tommy, only Tom. He did not have a son. He and his wife Sydney had 2 daughters. The man that Jessi was engaged to and had carried on a relationship for almost a year did not exist. And now Tom's wife, Sydney, had uncovered their relationship and seemed to be genuinely concerned for Jessi. She wrote, quote, "From what I am pulling from your letters, you are much closer to my daughter's ages than mine, let alone Tom's. Are you over the age of 18? In this alone, he can be prosecuted as a child predator. He is taking advantage of you. You need to be more cautious with your safety. You will only be hurt by a man who has mastered the art of manipulation and lies. Do not trust words on a computer." Now, let's dig into the real Tom. Tom had in fact been a Marine, but he had never been in active combat. Tom Montgomery became a dedicated father who volunteered with his daughter's swimming club and taught Sunday school at their family church. But in recent years, Tom was struggling. He began having issues with erectile dysfunction, and his marriage began to suffer physically and emotionally. He found himself wanting to get lost in another world, online. Soon he found himself spending most of his free time in online gaming rooms, chatting with strangers. The first time Jessi reached out to him in Pogo's blackjack room, Tom was excited by the thought of an attractive young woman. When Jessi asked why he was in a room for teens when his profile listed him as 46, Tom supposedly panicked. He had heard about sting operations where undercover agents went looking for sexual predators online. Acting on impulse, Tom lied to Jessi, telling her he was 18 and using his dad's account. What I'd like to know is, did Tom intentionally go into the teens-only chat room to try to talk to younger women? Like, why was he in the teens' blackjack room in the first place? Unfortunately, we don't know. Maybe it was totally innocent and he thought the younger players were more at his skill level. I don't know. What we do know is once Jessi sent a photo of herself in a bikini, Tom was into it. And thus he began concocting the character of Tommy and made up stories about Tommy having a troubled past in an attempt to gain Jessi's sympathy, which is insane that he chose to include the raping a cheerleader story. Like, seriously, think about that. Anyways, the photo that he sent to Jessi was actually a picture of him. It was just taken 30 years earlier. Supposedly, Tom contemplated if he needed to break things off with the teenage Jessi, which is why he created the personality of Tommy's father, where, if you remember, Tommy's father, Tom Sr., told Jessi that the pair should end things. But ultimately, Jessi didn't, and Tommy couldn't bear to part with his internet fantasy life. Now let's talk about Tom's demise. His wife Cindy finding out about Jessi and that whole debacle. Well, it started with Cindy noticing that her husband was absolutely obsessed with using the internet. Keep in mind, this was 2005, so in the Montgomery household, there was just one family computer, and Tom would apparently kick off his teenage daughters so he could use the computer and would be up all hours of the night typing away. But what blew the affair wide open was a package that Cindy found that Jessi sent to her husband. Inside was a letter and a pair of red underwear. When Cindy realized the sender was a teenage girl, she was not only horrified that her husband had been carrying on this virtual affair, but that it was with a child and that he had manipulated this child, who, yes, was 18, but we all know in this scenario that's basically a child. When Cindy confronted her husband about this, apparently the two mutually decided they should get divorced. But Cindy was still disturbed that this 18-year-old girl, Jessi, thought she was engaged to an 18-year-old man who did not exist and was in fact a middle-aged man. So she took it upon herself to break the news to Jessi and expose her husband's lies. After Jessi got this letter, she was not happy. She texted Tom and told him he should be in jail, and she wanted an explanation. Tom could not give her one. He just said his plan was to eventually have Tommy's dad tell her that Tommy died in combat, but his wife Cindy outed him before he had the chance. Jessi was furious and heartbroken, so she did something that, while may seem somewhat odd, I also feel like it's something a hurt teenage girl would totally do. She wanted to get more clarity and more closure, so to speak. So she reached out to a friend of Tom's that he had mentioned also used the gaming website. His name was Brian Barrett, and his username was Beefcake1572. Brian, however, was much younger than his coworker and friend Tom. Brian was a college student who lived at home with his parents and worked part-time at the same tool plant as Tom Montgomery. Brian was a hard worker. He'd wake up at dawn and spend the day at school before heading to work, where his shift lasted well into the night. So going back to something that may seem kind of strange, but again, seems like something a teenage girl might do, Jessi messaged Brian and told him all about what his friend Tom did to her, and apparently Brian was happy to lend a sympathetic ear. And from there, the two of them started messaging more and more. And soon, Brian found himself thinking Jessi was pretty much his dream girl. He loved that she wasn't just beautiful, she was also an athlete, like Brian had been all throughout high school. Just as Jessi had done with Tommy, she began sending Brian sexy photos and handwritten letters. And before long, the two were declaring their love for each other. And with Brian swooning over Jessi, he soon joined her in her disgust for Tom Montgomery and what he did to Jessi. And then things started to get a little nasty. Brian and Jessi started going into the chat rooms on their gaming site that Tom frequented and would tell other players what Tom did and call him a loser and a predator. And apparently they actually got him suspended from that gaming website. And then Jessi and Brian decided that Tom's colleagues needed to know about the incident as well. They debated how Brian should tell them, with Brian asking Jessi, quote, "What should I say?" "Up to you, baby," she replied. "I have to fuck with him," Brian typed back. "You are so bad," Jessi answered. And so Brian did tell people at the factory where he and Tom worked what Tom had done, and even left printouts of the conversations he and Jessi had just lying around the factory. Oof. And so, as you can imagine, Tom was mortified and furious. And he messaged Jessi saying, thanks to her and Brian, his coworkers now think of him as a sexual predator and didn't want to be around him. As far as Tom Montgomery was concerned, his life as he knew it had been destroyed. Montgomery told both Brian and Jessi to leave him alone. He would no longer talk to Brian online or when they crossed paths at work. When Brian told other colleagues that he hoped to drive down to West Virginia to meet with Jessi, the news made its way back to Montgomery, and this upset him even more. He knew that Jessi was a virgin, and he had become fixated with the idea of him being her first. Now he was imagining a scenario in which Brian would be taking her virginity. But buckle up, because Jessi was not done with Tom Montgomery. After 2 weeks of silence, she began messaging him again, saying that she missed Tommy, who she now knew was made up. Jessi explained that she had truly fallen in love with the idea of the made-up 18-year-old MarineSniper. She said she had never felt the same way about Brian and had really only flirted with him to get revenge against Tom Montgomery. The revelation that Tommy never existed had left her in despair and unable to believe in true love. She believed, quote, if he existed, I would still be holding on to him every night and sharing dreams with him every night. Tom found himself drawn back in. He alternated between making hostile digs about Jessi's relationship with Brian and then apologizing for having lied to her. Jessi asked if they could be friends and said the way she viewed it, Tom was her only connection to Tommy, whom she still loved. Tom admitted that he missed Tommy too, typing, I still feel Tommy in my heart. He added that he never stopped caring for Jessi, and the two agreed to start over as friends. But things weren't peaceful for long. The new friendship had serious issues from the get-go. For starters, it was clear that Tom still wanted a romantic relationship with Jessi. During their long late-night chat sessions, he sent her a message about how he wanted more than she could give. Whenever he caught wind of Jessi's online friendships with other men, Montgomery's sweet tone switched in an instant. He would send Jessi a cluster of angry messages, calling her a whore and saying he hoped she would be raped. Tom stalked Jessi's MySpace account and grilled her about who she'd been talking to. But he reserved a large portion of his rage for his colleague, Brian. Tom Montgomery told Jessi, quote, I hate him with a passion, and for 10 cents I would eliminate him. Jessi replied, that's a little drastic, isn't it? Montgomery responded, payback is a motherfucker, Jessi. I am the ultimate weapon. I am a Marine. Brian will pay in blood. Tom also had a confession for Jessi. After Brian outed his catfishing of Jessi to their colleagues, Montgomery had seriously considered shooting him. Despite the threats and now this admission, Jessi said nothing to Brian or the police. Instead, she merely promised Montgomery that she would not talk to Brian again. Over the following few months, Jessi and Montgomery's relationship fell into a toxic pattern. Sometimes they would get along and even engage in role play where Montgomery pretended to be Tommy again and have cyber sex. At the same time, Jessi was still messaging other men and Tom could not handle that. He sent Jessi abusive messages, even threatening to publish her address online. And soon, Tom was seemingly at the end of his rope. He told Jessi that if she didn't leave him alone, he'd travel to her home in West Virginia and hurt her. Jessi backed off, and Tom got a message from Jessi's mother, Mary, demanding that he stay away from her daughter. Tom said he would, but said he wanted Jessi to also stay away from him. A couple of weeks went by, and Jessi couldn't stay away, apparently. She messaged Tom, who responded by reminding her that her mother had forbidden the two from talking, but Jessi shrugged it off, writing, "She'll never know." Jessi had promised Montgomery she was no longer speaking to Brian. But in September 2006, Montgomery was looking at Jessi's MySpace page when he noticed something that enraged him. Brian was listed as one of her friends, and the two had been messaging each other there. Montgomery confronted Jessi, asking if she and Brian were back together. Quote, "I can handle you with anyone but him, he messaged Jessi. Jessi insisted that the two weren't together, but had just talked occasionally as friends. But there was someone else Jessi had met, a new guy who went by the nickname Shake, and she thought the two of them had something special. Tom didn't believe her. He was convinced that Shake was actually Brian and that the two were in a romantic relationship. Tom also believed that Brian had plans to drive down to West Virginia to spend Thanksgiving with Jessi. Quote, "You better be very afraid now," he warned. "I told you what would happen if you and Brian got together." At around midnight on Wednesday, September 13th, 2006, Jessi and Montgomery began chatting online. Jessi repeatedly insisted that Shake and Brian were not the same person and asked Montgomery to leave her alone. She told him, quote, "I'm asking you to love me enough to let go." Jessi announced that she was going to delete her accounts on Pogo and Yahoo before signing off with one final message that said, quote, "I love you and will miss you, Tom. Goodbye, baby. I'm leaving now." At 1:36 a.m., Montgomery replied, quote, "Run to Brian, you whore. He is waiting for you." 4 hours later, Montgomery checked back online to see if Jessi had indeed deleted her profiles, and she had not. So he sent her several abusive messages calling her a liar, and then messaged Brian stating, "Your girlfriend is just like you. Nothing but lies. Keep her the fuck away from me. You wanted her, you got her." The next morning, September 17th, 2006, Brian Barrett's parents and younger brother walked through the door of their home in Lockport, New York, and immediately knew something was wrong. The trio had spent the weekend camping with family friends, while 22-year-old Brian stayed at home. But there was no sign of Brian anywhere, and it was clear that the family's cat hadn't been fed in a couple days. This was completely unlike Brian, who was typically very reliable and responsible. Even if he had planned to go out, he would have made sure to feed the pets. Soon after, there was a knock at the door. It was the police. Flashing back to 2 days earlier, Brian Barrett finished his shift around 10 p.m., and as he got into his truck to head out, suddenly gunshots pierced the air. Brian died instantly. Witnesses who heard the shots told detectives they saw someone dressed in camo and a ski mask lurking in the area. The only clues left at the scene was a gun clip with what looked like some dog hair on it and a peach pit that was discarded nearby. To the cops, the crime looked like a sniper-style shooting. Now, while Brian's family was dumbfounded at who would want to hurt their son, Brian's coworkers had an idea and told police about the bizarre online love triangle involving Brian, Tom, and an 18-year-old girl. And according to one colleague, Tom said that if he ever killed someone, he would use a military-style rifle and would not be stupid enough to leave any shell casings lying around. This was significant, given that the bullets found on Brian's body matched this type of rifle. Investigators were eager to speak to Tom Montgomery for themselves, but they couldn't track him down. They began to worry that perhaps Montgomery had left the state to take revenge against Jessi as well. Using a number saved in Brian's cell phone, officers were able to reach Jessi. Jessi confirmed that she had been involved with both Brian and Tom, and that she had become increasingly concerned about Tom's erratic behavior. And so Jessi apparently did warn Brian that Tom was making violent threats against him, and Brian asked her if he should report this to his boss or another coworker. Jessi apparently didn't directly reply, and instead told him she was very scared of Tom. Brian responded, "Yeah, me too. He's crazy." The last Jessi had heard from Tom Montgomery was on the day that Brian was killed. Having finally cut ties with him 2 days prior, Tom continued to message Jessi, asking her really shocking, vulgar questions that I won't say here, basically just calling her a whore and asking her if she's doing sexual things to her boyfriend Brian. On this day, he also called Jessi and apparently was screaming obscenities in a wild rage. Jessi hung up on him, and he reached out to her later that night, about an hour and a half after Brian was killed. Jessi received a message from Montgomery asking, quote, "You waiting for your boyfriend?" Just over 2 hours later, he tried again, typing, "Come on, Brian won't mind you talking to me." Officers in New York were worried that Jessi might be in danger, so they contacted police in West Virginia and asked them to visit Jessi at home. Around 6 a.m., Officer Lee Kirk and his partner arrived at the address that Jessi provided. It was a quaint white house with peeling paint in the small town of Oak Hill. A short, middle-aged woman with a bob haircut answered the door. She identified herself as 45-year-old Mary Sheila. The officers asked if anyone named Jessi lived at the home. Mary replied that her daughter Jessi no longer lived there as she was away at college. Officer Kirk reported this back to a police officer in New York, who then told Kirk that they had just spoken with Jessi hours earlier and she told them that she was at home. So Officer Kirk returned to the house and asked Mary if Jessi had been home recently. Mary said no, and she didn't have a phone number for Jessi either. Officer Kirk found this hard to believe. He told Mary they were concerned that her daughter could be in serious danger and they needed to talk to her right away. Mary looked nervous. Officer Kirk could tell something was bothering her. As he continued to press her for information, Mary began to cry. "I'm Jessi," she said. "I have been using my daughter's name on the internet." As Mary would later explain in an interview with Wired magazine, she claimed to have signed up for an account on Pogo to play games as a way of relaxing. It was apparently only after paying a fee for a premium service that she realized that she had accidentally used Jessi's name and details, and was therefore directed to the site's room for teenagers. Mary said she was happily married to her husband and had no intentions or desire to be involved with anyone else. She said she only ever started to talk to Tom Montgomery's alter ego, Tommy, because Tommy seemed like a troubled young man in need of care. Mary offered no explanation why she sent him photos of her daughter wearing a bikini, engaged in cyber sex with him, or agreed to marry him. After learning from Cindy Montgomery that Tommy wasn't real, Mary said that she became concerned that Tom might be talking to other young women online. So she therefore decided to keep communicating with him as a way to distract him from talking to other teenage girls. Mary said as Tom's temper flared and he became increasingly jealous, she continued speaking to him out of fear that he might harm himself or others if she cut him off. Mary said she never had feelings for Brian either. He was simply a sweet kid who started flirting with her, and she said she didn't know what to do without exposing her true identity. The investigators in New York who had been communicating with Jessi were beyond stunned to learn about this revelation. Mary had sounded just like a teenage girl during their phone conversations. One detective was apparently in such disbelief that he actually drove down from New York to West Virginia to meet Mary for himself. There, Mary's computer was confiscated. By this point, she had been communicating with Tom Montgomery for roughly a year and a half. On the computer, investigators found hundreds of photos of Mary's daughter, Jessi, many of which were clearly taken without Jessi's knowledge. Some photos focused on particular body parts and were taken from behind. And there was a video Mary had clearly filmed without her daughter's knowledge or consent, where she aimed the camera up Jessi's skirt. She then sent the footage to several individuals asking, quote, "Do you like it?" It turned out that Mary had been talking to more men than just Tom Montgomery and Brian Barrett. She had sent photos of her daughter and pairs of Jessi's underwear to numerous men online. Investigators soon found out that Jessi's MySpace page was just another tool Mary had used to talk to men. As detectives started going through the chat logs between Mary, Tom, and Brian, hundreds and hundreds of pages documented the countless hours Mary had spent talking to both men. And Tom's messages had made it well known how much he hated Brian and fantasized about committing violent acts. And there were all the mentions about his time as a Marine and how he knew to assassinate people. Investigators finally managed to track Tom Montgomery down. He hadn't gone to seek revenge against Jessi after all, and was still in the Buffalo area and showed up for his shift at work as normal. Detectives visited him at the factory and asked him if he would accompany them for questioning. Montgomery agreed, but asked if he could go to his car to retrieve his lunch first. He explained that he had brought in peaches and didn't want them to spoil. Detectives took note of this, fully aware that a peach pit had been found at the scene of Brian's murder. Tom Montgomery denied any involvement in the crime, but it wasn't looking good for him. In addition to being the obvious prime suspect, cell phone records placed him near the scene of the crime. Oh, and there was DNA on the peach pit found near Brian's truck that was a match to him. Tom also had a dog with the same fur found on the gun clip at the crime scene. Oh, and here's the real kicker. Tucked away in a toolbox that Tom had for work, investigators found a note that had been written many months earlier that said, quote, "On January 2nd, 2006, Tom Montgomery, 46 years old, ceases to exist and is replaced by an 18-year-old battle-scarred Marine. He is moving to West Virginia to be with the love of his life." The note went on to describe how 18-year-old Tommy had a black belt in karate, $2.5 million in the bank, and looked like a red-headed Harrison Ford. It sort of appeared to be an attempt for Tom to, I don't know, manifest himself into an entirely different person. Now for the part you have probably been waiting for, the bombshell. As detectives sat Tom Montgomery down for an interview, they revealed that the woman he had killed Brian Barrett over wasn't who he thought she was. She was a woman around his age who had been posing as her 18-year-old daughter. In terms of his reaction, investigators say the blood drained from Montgomery's face. Tom Montgomery was soon after charged with the murder of Brian Barrett. His wife and daughters cut ties with him immediately. And eventually, Tom took a plea deal for manslaughter, which I can't believe he was offered that, but anyhow, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, making him eligible for parole as of this year at the age of 65. In terms of what's going on with the parole, there is nothing updated about it online, but we will probably know soon. In 2009, director Barbara Schroeder made an incredible documentary about Brian Barrett's murder, and she called the film TalHotBlond. During an interview for the documentary, Tom Montgomery did not express remorse for Brian's murder or even discuss the crime directly. Instead, he focused on his state of mind at the time and his relationship with Jessi. Montgomery said he never doubted that Jessi was anyone other than who she said she was, and this was partly because of the enormous number of photos that Mary Sheila had sent of her daughter. Montgomery believes his problems stemmed from seeking solace online instead of talking to his family about his issues. Mary also spoke to Barbara Schroeder, but refused to be filmed or recorded. She told Barbara that all she ever wanted in life was to be a good mother. After her children grew up, she became bored and lonely, leading her to seek company online. She maintained that she only ever spoke to Tom Montgomery to prevent him from talking to real teenagers. Oh, and this is amazing. Mary also said she intended to write a book about the dangers of the internet. Now, apparently, Mary never spoke with her daughter Jessi about any of this. and she gave her husband a very watered-down version. She essentially said that she had been chatting online with two different men who worked together, and one had become jealous and killed the other. Mary insisted there was nothing sexual or romantic to these conversations, and it had just been chit-chat about online games and the weather. But the truth came out when some of Jessi's friends heard about the case, and Jessi decided to Google her mother's name. The search returned news stories about Brian's murder roughly 400 miles away in upstate New York. Jessi was horrified to discover exactly what had happened and how her mother had used her identity. Not only had Jessi's photos been shared with numerous men, they were also now splashed all over the internet in coverage of the case. Jessi told her father, who was equally distraught, and he divorced Mary, and Jessi apparently cut off all communication with her mother. Despite Mary's actions, she technically did not commit any crimes and therefore cannot be charged in relation to Brian's murder. Tom Montgomery feels that Mary should be incarcerated for her role that she played, as do Brian's parents. His parents have also advocated for laws requiring greater accountability online. They remember their son as being shy and quiet despite his tall stature and athletic build. At the time of his death, Brian was gaining confidence and discovering who he wanted to be. On weekends, he spent his time volunteering as a coach for a Little League baseball team. Brian loved working with kids so much that he had decided to become an industrial arts teacher, teaching students to work with wood and metal. This is an absolutely unreal case, and I would love to hear your thoughts below. Until next time.